With every second ticking away, the sound of pencil tips scratching paper echoes through the room. Tension thickens as Sylvester's mind races. His heart pounds louder with every turn of the page. The students around him crumble under the pressure, but his focus sharpens. He's racing against time, against expectations, and when the clock finally stops, everything changes. One flawless answer, one moment that could shatter everything he's ever known. Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. I'm so grateful you're here today. Whether you're a returning viewer or a first-time watcher, thank you for joining. I've got some incredible content lined up for you, and I'm excited to dive right in. If you enjoy this, don't forget to hit that like button, share with your friends, and of course, subscribe for more amazing videos. Thrilling, heart-stopping, and utterly unpredictable. This is the story that will leave you on the edge of your seat, desperate for more. Now, let's begin. Sylvester Thompson stood at the entrance of Golden Bridge Academy, his heart pounding in his chest. The building loomed large before him, its towering structure a symbol of the opportunity he had dreamed of, but never fully believed he would have. His family had just moved to the city from a quiet, small town, and this school, renowned for producing the brightest minds, felt like a place he didn't belong. The hallways buzzed with conversation as students walked past, their confident strides in stark contrast to his own nervous shuffle. Sylvester had always been quiet, often keeping to himself. In his old school, he kept his genius for solving complex math problems hidden, afraid that others might notice and mock him for being different. But here, in this place where everyone seemed to shine, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his insecurities pressing on him. He wasn't like these students, rich, self-assured, and surrounded by people who had always excelled. He was just a shy boy from a small town with a mind full of equations and numbers that others could never quite understand. Room 205, right, he muttered to himself, glancing at the schedule in his hand. His fingers trembled as he walked through the halls, eyes nervously flicking from face to face. The bustling students paid him no mind. He was just another new kid trying to fit in. When he finally reached room 205, he hesitated at the door. Taking a deep breath, he pushed it open, his eyes immediately locking onto the sleek, polished desks inside. The classroom was vast, with high ceilings and walls lined with framed degrees, accolades, and pictures of past award-winning students. At the front of the room stood a woman in her late 40s, her sharp gaze focused intently on the chalkboard where she was writing a complex algebraic equation. Her presence was commanding, and despite her back being to the class, there was something undeniably intimidating about her. This was Professor Martha Green, the elite math professor known for her intelligence and strict no-nonsense approach. "Take a seat, young man," Professor Green said without turning, her voice crisp and authoritative. It was the kind of voice that made even the most confident students fall silent. Sylvester quickly took a seat in the middle row, feeling the eyes of his classmates on him. He tried to avoid making any noise, adjusting himself in his chair in an attempt to become invisible. The students around him were already whispering among themselves, some glancing over their shoulders, sizing him up. "Today's lesson will be difficult," Professor Green announced, finally turning to face the class. "If you want to be at the top of your game, you'll need to understand this." Her piercing gaze swept over the students before she began scribbling furiously on the board. The equation that appeared was long, complex, far more advanced than anything Sylvester had ever seen at his old school. He felt a surge of excitement. It was just the kind of problem he loved. His heart began to race, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the thrill of the challenge. The students around him, however, appeared frustrated. A few groaned and muttered under their breath. "I don't get this at all," one student whispered, pushing his papers aside. "This is impossible." Sylvester's eyes remained fixed on the board. He could feel the tension mounting in the room, and the weight of the equation drawing him in. He could already see the solution forming in his mind, step by step, as his fingers itched to solve it. But he kept his head down, not wanting to draw attention to himself. The last thing he needed was to stand out in a place where everyone seemed so much more confident, so much more at home than he was. Professor Green's voice broke the silence, her tone sharp and commanding. "All right, class. Today's challenge is simple. Solve this equation in the next 10 minutes. If you can do it, I'll know you're truly ready for the rest of the year's work. If not, we'll need to work on your foundation." The equation on the board was no simple task. It wasn't just a basic formula or algebraic manipulation. It was a complex, multi-step problem involving advanced concepts that could easily overwhelm the average student. Some of the students in the class groaned, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared blankly at the board, the weight of the problem apparent on their faces. There was a definite sense of tension in the room. Sylvester, however, wasn't fazed. His eyes locked onto the board as his mind instantly began processing the equation. The symbols and numbers appeared to him like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Where others saw confusion, Sylvester saw patterns, an intricate web of relationships waiting to be untangled. He didn't look up, didn't glance around the room. The classroom faded into the background. All that mattered now were the numbers, the way they moved and flowed together. He felt the familiar rush of excitement building inside him as he worked through the equation step by step. His pencil moved quickly, effortlessly across the paper, solving one piece after another. It felt like a rhythm, a dance of logic and reason that he had practiced countless times before, though never in front of an audience. Sylvester didn't care about the other students around him. He knew they were struggling. He could hear the rustling of papers, the muttered frustration, the scratching of pencils as the others tried, and failed, to make sense of the equation. But for him, everything was coming together smoothly. The numbers clicked into place like puzzle pieces falling into their rightful spots. It was his escape, his sanctuary. In this moment, he felt at peace, completely in control. His heart began to race, but not from anxiety. It was the exhilaration of being completely absorbed in the work. This was the world he understood. This was the place where he didn't have to explain himself, where his mind could work freely without judgment. But as he worked, something nagged at the back of his mind. He had to keep his head down. He didn't want to stand out. Not here, not in this room full of students who had always been the best, the brightest. He didn't want to be the one that everyone turned to, the one who everyone watched. He had no desire for that kind of attention. He wanted to finish the problem, to blend into the background, to be just another student. The seconds ticked away as Sylvester's pencil flew across the page, his answers coming almost too quickly for his own comfort. He could hear the ticking of the clock in the corner of the room, but it felt like it was moving slower than he was. His hands never paused, moving from one part of the equation to the next, each step building on the one before it. His mind was a blur of numbers, equations, and solutions, each piece fitting perfectly into the next. Around him, the other students were still struggling. A few were whispering to one another, clearly trying to figure out what step to take next. Some were looking around, searching for a hint or a clue, their faces strained with frustration. A couple of students glanced over at Sylvester, noticing the rapid motion of his pencil. But he didn't look up. He didn't want to meet their eyes. He didn't want them to see him solving the problem effortlessly. It wasn't his fault they couldn't keep up. It wasn't his fault his mind worked this way. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling that any moment now, someone would notice. Someone would see that he was different. And that was the last thing he wanted. The seconds turned into minutes, and still, his pencil never slowed. He reached the final step, double-checking his work before writing down the final answer. It was perfect, clean, precise. His heart was still racing. But this time, it wasn't from fear. It was the thrill of the challenge, the satisfaction of knowing he had completed something no one else had managed to do. But then, the bell rang. Professor Green's voice echoed through the room. "Time's up. Pencils down, everyone." Sylvester's eyes flicked up to the front of the room. He was the only one who had finished. The others were still scribbling, some barely halfway through the problem. His eyes darted to Professor Green, who was already walking between the desks, collecting papers. She stopped at his desk, her gaze lingering on his paper for a moment longer than it should have. Sylvester held his breath. Please don't notice. Please don't say anything. But she did. Professor Green stood still, her sharp eyes scanning his work. The briefest flicker of surprise crossed her face, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual composed expression. She didn't speak immediately, instead moving to the next desk. But Sylvester knew. He knew that somehow she had seen. She had noticed the effortless way he solved the problem, the precision, the confidence in his work, and he couldn't help but wonder if, for the first time in his life, he might not be able to hide anymore. But Sylvester kept his head down, fearing any attention. He had no desire to stand out. He simply wanted to finish the problem. The bell rang, breaking the intense silence that had settled in the room. Students began packing up their things, eager to leave, but Sylvester remained seated, his pencil still clutched tightly in his hand. His mind buzzed with a strange mix of relief and anxiety. He had finished the equation so easily, but now, it seemed, the moment of truth had arrived. Professor Green was moving down the rows, her footsteps deliberate, almost as if she were trying to make a statement with each step. Her gaze flicked from one paper to the next, her eyes cold, focused. When she reached Sylvester's desk, she stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the clock ticking away the seconds. Sylvester's heart sank. Had she noticed? Was there something wrong with his work? He tried to breathe, but it felt like there was something stuck in his chest. He couldn't look up. He kept his head down, staring at the paper in front of him, avoiding her eyes. Professor Green's gaze lingered on his paper longer than she had spent on any other student's. She didn't make a sound. The class had gone quiet again, though the other students were packing up in haste, eager to leave. Sylvester felt his palms grow sweaty. Professor Green was studying him now, not just his work. Her eyes traced the lines of the equation, the precise answers that had come so naturally to him. And then they lifted to meet his gaze. "Sylvester," she said slowly, her voice a soft whisper. Her usual sharp tone was now replaced with something else, a strange hesitation. This is perfect." Her eyes flicked back to his paper, disbelief creeping into her features. Did you solve this on your own?" Sylvester froze. He wanted to say something, but his throat felt tight. He swallowed hard and glanced up at her, feeling exposed for the first time in his life. He could feel her eyes digging into him, piercing right through the mask he had spent years building. His hands trembled, but he forced himself to speak. "Yes, Professor," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I like math. It's just a puzzle to me." Her face remained unreadable, but Sylvester could see the faintest flicker of something in her eyes, something that wasn't quite approval, but wasn't judgment either. She stood still for a moment longer, her fingers brushing over his paper like she was testing its authenticity, like she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Inside, Sylvester's mind raced. He had never intended for anyone to notice. He hadn't wanted this attention. He just wanted to solve the problem, to be left alone, to blend in. But now, Professor Green was looking at him like she had just uncovered something extraordinary. He wanted to shrink into his seat, but he couldn't. Not with her standing there, her presence so commanding. Professor Green's lips pressed into a thin line, and she stepped back, still staring at the paper as though it held some secret. "You are quite advanced for your age, Sylvester. This isn't just good work. This is the work of someone who understands things far beyond the level of this class." She spoke to herself as much as she spoke to him, her tone laced with both awe and confusion. Sylvester shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wanted to say more, to explain that math just made sense to him, that it wasn't anything special. But how could he say that when it felt like he was standing on the edge of something huge, something that could change everything? "Stay after class, Sylvester. I need to talk to you." Professor Green's voice sliced through the air, final and firm. Sylvester's stomach tightened. He didn't want to stay. He didn't want to face whatever was coming next. What did she want from him? Was this the moment everything changed? Had she already told the other teachers about him? Would they ask him to compete in some competition or force him to take advanced classes? He had no idea what she meant, but it felt too big, too dangerous. Professor Green turned, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she walked to her desk. Her movements were purposeful, confident. Sylvester's hands gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white. He knew he couldn't run away now. The last thing he wanted was to stand out, but he was already too far into this. His mind kept circling back to her words. Stay after class. He watched the other students file out, none of them paying him any special attention, but each of them unaware that he had just been marked by the one professor everyone respected and feared. The classroom seemed to grow quieter with every passing second, until it was just him and Professor Green, standing on opposite sides of the room. Sylvester exhaled, his breath shaky, and slowly rose from his seat. The air between them felt thick, charged. He could feel her eyes on him as he walked to the front of the classroom. He hadn't planned for this, hadn't wanted any of this attention, but now that he was here, he had no choice but to face it. Take a seat, Professor Green instructed, her voice as calm and precise as ever, though there was a subtle edge to it that told Sylvester she wasn't quite sure what to do with him. She pulled out a chair across from her desk and gestured for him to sit. Sylvester lowered himself into the chair, his body tense, his hands still trembling. He looked up at Professor Green, but she didn't say anything right away. Instead, she flipped through a stack of papers on her desk, as though buying time or thinking through her next words carefully. Finally, she met his gaze again, her eyes searching his face. Sylvester, I have to ask you something. Why did you hide this? The question came out of nowhere, as if she had been pondering it for a long time. He opened his mouth to respond but closed it again. He wasn't sure what to say. There was so much he wanted to explain, but how could he? How could he explain something so personal, something he hadn't even fully understood himself? He had always kept his genius hidden, not out of shame, but out of fear. Fear that being different would make him a target. I didn't want anyone to notice, he finally whispered, his voice barely audible. I just want to be normal. Sylvester sat across from Professor Green, his palms sweaty and his heart thumping in his chest. The small, dimly lit office felt like it was closing in around him. He had been through countless classrooms, countless lessons, but this was different. He wasn't sure what was going to happen next. Was he about to be expelled for solving the problem too easily? Would she tell him he didn't belong here? That he was out of his depth? Professor Green, Sylvester began, his voice shaky. He didn't know how to explain himself, how to justify his desire to blend in, to stay invisible. His mind was racing, trying to find the right words, but before he could finish his sentence, she cut him off. Sylvester, she said softly, but her voice was laced with something he couldn't quite place. Concern, perhaps. I need you to listen to me. What you did today was extraordinary. But there's something more going on here, something you may not even realize. Sylvester's eyes widened. What do you mean? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. He was hanging on her every word, unsure of what kind of truth was coming next. Was this about his talent? Or was it something darker, something more dangerous? Professor Green leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. Her tone shifted, became more serious, more focused, as though she was about to share something with him that she hadn't told anyone else. I know you've been hiding your talents, she began, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. I've seen it before, with students who are too afraid to show who they really are. But Sylvester, you're not just a good math student. You're a genius. Sylvester blinked, stunned. The word echoed in his mind, reverberating against the walls of his skull. Genius. He had always known he was good at math, that the problems came easily to him. But he had never thought of himself as anything special. He had never thought of himself as extraordinary. The word felt too big, too far beyond him. But now that she said it, it seemed to wrap around him like a cloak. Professor Green continued, her voice dropping lower, as though she was speaking a truth that was both urgent and dangerous. And I need you to understand something very important. This school, this city, there are people who would kill to have someone like you on their team. They would do anything to have you work for them, to use your mind for their own gain. You have a choice now, Sylvester. You can either let them take advantage of your gifts, or you can decide to use them for yourself, to choose your own path. Sylvester felt his stomach tighten. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. He had never imagined that his love for math, for solving problems, could lead to something like this. He had only ever wanted to learn, to understand the world in a way that felt right to him. But now, it felt like that innocent desire had somehow opened a door to something much bigger, something he wasn't sure he was ready for. "But I just want to learn," Sylvester protested, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to be used. I don't want to be part of some game. I just want to understand math. I just want to be like everyone else." Professor Green's eyes softened for a moment, her sharp edges dulling as she studied him. She sighed, a deep, weary sigh that carried with it the weight of experience. "I understand," she said gently. "I understand more than you know. But sometimes, the world doesn't let you stay in the shadows. It doesn't let you remain unnoticed, no matter how much you want to. You're going to have to decide, Sylvester. Decide how much of yourself you're willing to give away, and what kind of life you want to lead." Her words were like a slow, steady drip of cold water over his head, sinking in, layer by layer. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him, settling deep in his chest. He had always been able to hide his talents, keep them to himself, to avoid the attention. But now it seemed like he might not have that luxury anymore. "Sylvester," Professor Green's voice softened again, "no matter what you choose, know this. You have the power to change the world. You have the power to do things that no one else can. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." Sylvester looked up at her, meeting her gaze for the first time since they had started this conversation. There was something in her eyes, something that made him feel as though the weight of the world was suddenly on his shoulders. But there was also something else, something that made him feel as though he wasn't alone in this. Professor Green wasn't just pushing him to be great. She was warning him, preparing him for the difficult road ahead. Sylvester didn't know what to think. He didn't know what his future would look like, or how to choose the path that would be right for him. All he knew was that in this small, quiet office, he had just been handed a decision that would shape his entire life. And he couldn't help but wonder, what kind of person would he become, with this much power, this much potential? Would he stay in the shadows, hiding from the world that seemed so determined to push him into the spotlight? Or would he take a step forward, embracing what he could become, and changing everything in the process? The world outside seemed distant, but in this moment, Sylvester knew that whatever decision he made next would echo far beyond the walls of Golden Bridge Academy. Days passed after his conversation with Professor Green, and Sylvester's mind churned with uncertainty. Every waking moment was consumed by the weight of the choice that lay before him. The pressure was almost unbearable. Should he embrace his talents, allow himself to be shaped by others, by the people who saw him as a powerful asset, or should he continue in the shadows, hiding his gifts from the world, keeping to the quiet comfort of his own thoughts? Every night, as the weight of his dilemma bore down on him, he found it harder to sleep. He had always been the quiet, unnoticed student, the one who kept his head down, the one who preferred to stay in the background. But now, for the first time, that quiet existence felt like a cage made of fear. Fear of standing out, fear of being used, fear of becoming someone else's tool. But as the days stretched on, the world seemed to close in around him. Every time he passed a student, a teacher, or even a stranger, He could hear the echoes of Professor Green's words in his mind. You have the power to change the world. You can do things no one else can. It was as if those words were written in the air around him, pressing him to confront them, to decide what kind of person he wanted to be. It was late one afternoon, as the sky began to turn a warm orange, that Sylvester found himself standing alone on a rooftop overlooking the city. The breeze was cool against his skin, and the bustling streets below seemed far away, like another world entirely. He looked out at the sprawling city before him, the buildings stretching up into the sky like giants in the distance. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets and painting the sky in hues of pink and purple. As he stood there, the rush of the wind seemed to clear his mind. He thought of his mother, of the way she had always encouraged him to embrace his gifts. Don't hide your gifts, son. They are meant to be shared, to help others. Her words came back to him in full force, and suddenly it all clicked. This wasn't just about solving equations or proving how smart he was. This was about something bigger, something that reached beyond himself. Sylvester took a deep breath, feeling the weight on his shoulders ease slightly. He didn't have to let others use him. He could use his gifts in a way that felt true to who he was. He could help others, his family, his community. He could make a difference. He wasn't just some prodigy to be controlled or manipulated. He was Sylvester Thompson, and he had the power to shape his own future. His heart swelled with clarity as the sun dipped lower behind the horizon. The decision was no longer a heavy burden, but a clear, shining path. He didn't need to be afraid of standing out anymore. He didn't need to run from the world. He would rise, not because others told him to, but because it was his choice. He would use his mind, his strength, his heart, to lead, to create, to inspire. As the last rays of the sun kissed the city below, Sylvester Thompson made a promise to himself, a promise to never let anyone define him. He would not be shaped by the expectations of others, nor would he hide in the shadows. He would define his own path, create his own future. The weight that had burdened him for so long lifted. The wind seemed to carry away his doubt, leaving him with a newfound sense of purpose. Sylvester knew that he was about to embark on a journey unlike anything he had ever imagined. But whatever the future held, he was ready. Because, for the first time, he knew exactly who he was, and exactly who he wanted to become. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Your support means the world to me. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. Stay tuned for more heartwarming stories coming your way.